to ask Joshua to come to the stage. He's going to address us on behalf of the youth of the Communist Party, our movement, Red Youth. So Josh, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, comrades. What a lovely sight.
Thank you.
Dear comrades, representatives of fraternal parties and anti-imperialist nations, I've been asked to speak a little on the changes that the Great October Revolution triggered in Britain. But as any serious student of historical materialism will know, containing any analysis within borders is not only difficult, but also limited. So I'll speak a bit on the examples Britons were shown by the Soviets during and after the historic proletarian revolution. That great event came at the end of an imperialist and an inter-imperialist war that caused the deaths of over 20 million worldwide. That was World War I. Owing to the uneven development of capitalism, the new emerging capitalist nations found their home markets insufficient to absorb capital or furnish enough labour and resources, yet lacked the colonies the established imperialists held. But these older imperialist nations already controlled most of the world's peoples and resources. A world war to redivide the labour force, markets and those resources was triggered by these contradictions. Alongside this, a great advancement in Marxist theory was achieved. Lenin brought Marx's work forward to the conditions of imperialism and proletarian revolution. In his work, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, he defined imperialism, showed clearly its nature and development, and made clear the intrinsic economic laws that caused the endless cycles of wars we still to this day suffer under. Russia, a once great imperial power, after their revolution, could now develop down a path that didn't rely on the subjugation of this or that country to bring back super profits to its bourgeoisie and the small traitorous strata of bribed workers, the labour aristocracy. In fact, socialist construction allowed a system that was built on the labour, democratically organised and centrally planned, of a class-conscious workforce that rejected the oppression of others to maintain a good standard of living. For the first time since class society appeared, the mass of the workers would hold state power. Russia would be a dictatorship of the proletariat. As I said before, containing these earth-shaking movements within borders is impossible, and nor could these ideas be contained. The shining example of the working class seizing political power and building their own state, combined with distribution of Marxist literature, led workers in the oppressed and oppressing countries alike to question the status quo, question the divine right to rule by minority classes, which under feudalism was bestowed by God and under capitalism by dint of owning raw materials, means of production and money. To question the lie that to get our bread and housing, we must hold other peoples in servitude. The adept navigation of the national question by Comrade Lenin and Comrade Stalin showed how peace between peoples could be achieved. It wasn't just workers who saw this lodestar. The ruling class did too. The landowners and capitalists saw the future laid out ahead of them, a future where the exalted few would be shorn of their ability to live decadent lifestyles off the backs of countless workers and peasants. A war-weary yet hardened and trained mass of workers, armed with the knowledge of what their class can achieve if organised and united, could not be ignored or beaten into submission. The struggles of the workers of Britain at this time, combined with leadership by a vanguard of advanced workers, able to answer the question, what do we replace capitalism with, forced many concessions from the British ruling class. Housing reforms, the women's vote, and some social security measures were won in the wake of World War I. But these necessarily fell short of true change. the ruling class wouldn't ever peacefully loosen their vice grip on economic or political power. You could compare these meagre reforms with the right to food, housing, education, medicine, and abolition of unemployment, amongst many more, achieved by the Soviet Union over just a couple of decades, and all without exploiting a workforce, home or abroad. Compare this to the funding of concessions that British workers won, which have always been based on the increased oppression and exploitation of the peoples under the control of the British Empire. The placating of the rising masses was somewhat achieved, but this was followed by a steady erosion of everything we thought we had won for good. Following World War II, another wider package of concessions was granted to the working class, this time given by a coalition of bourgeois parties, Labour and Tory, in fear of what the British working class would do after seeing the gains of Soviet socialism and the smashing of the fascist hordes by the victorious Red Army. On the basis of these reforms, the British class did not push forward to achieve state power, allowing itself instead to be bought off by the introduction of the NHS, by the massive reduction in unemployment, by the creation of social housing, and the nationalisation of many key industries. But all this was a mere shadow of what the Soviet Union had achieved itself decades earlier. Yet it was presented by those communists at the time as the first step in a progression of peaceful reforms that would eventually bring us to socialism in Britain. The Soviet Union, led by the Communist Party, went even further, not only refusing to squeeze one nation to support another, but by actively supporting nearly every liberation effort across the globe. This spirit of internationalism is fundamental to a communist view of the world. Ultimately, no worker can truly be free while some of us live in chains. This is the antithesis to bourgeois nationalism, racism, social chauvinism, something which has and still does hamper class consciousness in Britain today. Until that changes, British workers will forever compare their padded chains favourably with the sharp and heavy chains of the oppressed countries, forgetting that a chain is a chain, no matter how comfortably it is wrought. More advanced workers, thanks to the proletarian internationalism put into practice by the Soviets, would chafe even at a featherweight, silk-lined manacle and stand with their brothers and sisters united by class, not by identity, size of wage packet, or skin colour. Britons, Marxists or not, can clearly see the downturn in our living conditions, can see the limitations of individual efforts to offset this, and are looking for answers. These are very hard to find, thanks to the unrelenting propaganda and falsification of history by the bourgeoisie and their hired lackeys. But we communists are duty-bound to counteract this. We must be honest, pragmatic, but always hopeful. Workers are lied to so often by our schools, universities, news and media that when they see the truth, it feels like a cold glass of water in the desert. So we must tell them that this downturn isn't a blip, a bump in the road. It is a return to working life under capitalism, unpadded by concessions, the concessions we've had since World War II. British society is returning to a normal in which the great majority of people eking out a bare sustenance while a shrinking number of super-rich exploiters live a life of luxury. The standard of living for the majority of workers is steadily being levelled down to that of our brothers and sisters in the oppressed countries. We will see that to capital, a worker is a worker is a worker, no matter where they were born. Capital sees it this way. It's time for workers to see it this way too. I believe we workers are slowly seeing this more clearly, but we don't have the time for conditions to bring this understanding. We must study scientific socialism in order to bring these ideas to the masses and hasten the day when we are able to stand up as a class. The recent mass rejection of imperialist propaganda, the example being the rejection by many of the imperialist media narrative that somehow Israel is a victim while destroying the Palestinian people, gives me much hope that the time when our children will look back and be befuddled that we ever lived in such a system as this will arrive sooner rather than later. Since the emergence of class society, humanity has suffered through a dark, cold winter. In the wake of the glorious struggles of the Paris Commune of 1871, the first warm winds of a new life were felt. But as many of us know, there sometimes comes a false spring and a seeming retreat back into winter. Winter returned, but the idea of the spring to come was not forgotten, in fact, could not be forgotten. A retreat does not mean permanent failure. It is a chance to pause, learn from mistakes, and take the time to plan our next advance. For the enemy, the retreat after Paris was seen as complete defeat. Capitalist reaction became fierce, bold. It became overconfident. In the interim between the Paris Commune and the next great step in the proletarian struggle, the Great October Revolution, movements all over the world for revolutionary independence from imperialism and its feudal supports were trampled, and certain workers in the imperialist countries were bribed to maintain social peace. The enemy thought themselves the victors. They didn't understand that the runaway development of monopoly capitalism and its subsequent descent into parasitism, decadence, and moribundity were creating the conditions for its undoing, deepening all the inequalities and contradictions of that system, spreading them across the world, and creating the forces that will enable its destruction. The great achievements of the October Revolution suffered a severe blow with the triumph of Khrushchevite revisionism in the CPSUB of 1956, which over a period of 30 years, through the so-called reforms, led to the collapse of the once glorious USSR. Heavy though that blow was, history has not stopped as the bourgeois ideologues would have us believe. Learning from the experience of developments in the USSR, the proletarian and oppressed masses of the world are bound to chart a course for their social liberation. There is absolutely no reason for us to be despondent. Capitalism has no future to offer humanity. The future belongs to communism. Thank you.